remove those capacitors that were tacked on there, and that looks still a lot of mess in there, but at least we've got rid of those. What I've decided to do with this amp is instead of having one channel, I'm going to have two channels, and I'm going to model them differently, so we've got, at least the amp's got a bit more versatility. Now, one of the reasons why I'm doing that is, if we look at this layout on here, we've got volume and treble and bass there, and that kind of fits for this area of it, and then these don't seem to have anything on it, although obviously it's obvious which is which. So do away with this channel, do away with this channel, do away with this channel. So the outer two channels we do away with, that just leaves us as knobs in the center. Do away with the shit festive danger there, the 250 volt plus HT possibilities, death trap in there, all that goes except for the pilot light. That'll be 6.3, and then it gives me some options to at least do something with this front panel, because it does look rather poor. So that's my idea, and so we'll design this channel, tweak it to say more like a Marshall, and tweak this one probably more like a Fender, or maybe look at some other schematics and design. So basically we've got two different channels, and we have a choice, we can plug into either. So if we come back round again onto there, so that means getting rid of two of the tubes, and obviously that's one of them, because these are pretty elementary. This one here is coming down to that set of 4 controls, so it'd be quite easy to remove that tube, and the first tube on there, they're all coming down that, again, side, that first channel, so we can get rid of those. So if we wipe those out, that's going to leave us with two tubes, which are 2 EAC83s, so 2 triodes for each channel, plus the EF86 that they're going into. So we should have a fair amount of gain there. There's a few things I'm still iffy about in this amp. One is this here. Oh dear, can't see that because the camera's out of shot. So let's just hone the camera up and see if we can zoom in. So we have zoomed in on there already. So there is what we're looking at. This looks to me like that's been bridged for some reason. So I'm going to have to try and look on the schematic and see if that's been bridged as a mod, or whether it should be like that. But you can definitely see that's been bridged, and you can definitely see that soldering is not original. So there's a possible botch job. So that's what we're going to do. Remove that tube, and then modify the rest of what preamp sections we've got left. We're going to modify it. We're going to whip those controls off there, whip those controls off there, get rid of the 240 volt death trap, 6.3 pilot light, so those will be gone. So that's what we'll roughly be left with, and the pilot light, and then we can maybe look at doing something with this board and see if we can tidy it up a bit, make it look attractive, unlike me. So I'm just looking at some of the sections of this circuit for this Selmer 100 PA, which we convert into a guitar amp. So I've been looking at the preamp section that you can see there, and also this long tail pair phase splitter, phase inverter, and this EF86. So preamp stage, let's have a look at that in detail. So here's one I prepared earlier. Oops, well, almost prepared. Let's get rid of that. So now we can see this in a bit more detail. So the input jack there going into pin 7, and then which seems a bit weird that that's what's happening, but it is going, that's the way it's going. And then it's going through the plate to pin 6, through the tone stack, that's being fed back into pin 2, and then it's coming out of pin 1, which then leaves us over here. Should move that. That leaves us here, coming through there, out of there, through this 470k resistor there, and then that takes us down along this route here. We don't have this send and return set out, and then that takes us through there towards this EF86. So here's where that's coming in, and it comes in through the master volume, and then out of that master volume it goes through into this EF86, and then that eventually comes out of the plate there. Now this is where this amp differs from a lot of guitar amps. This long tail pair is DC coupled, and what that means is there's no coupling capacitor there. So DC 90 volts, you can see that there, is going straight into the long tail grids, and you can see that's going in there. And then if we come down here along there, it's going through that 1 meg resistor, and then up there and into the other grid. So I've never seen a DC coupled long tail pair before, so I've done a bit of reading in the old preamp tube book, which I highly recommend. It's extremely complex and I only understand small parts of it, but nonetheless I managed to suss what's going on there. And apparently this long tail pair, when it's DC coupled, is often in hi-fi amps, so that probably makes sense with this being a PA. They've obviously done that to keep it as clean as possible. So this amp in its present state will probably make a better bass amp than it would a guitar amp. So there's a bit of thought. It's going to have to go into that and decide, are we going to leave that or are we going to change that? Do we leave it after we've got it all up and running properly, and then see what it's like, and then go from there and decide whether we're going to change it? I don't know, but I suppose there's pros and cons for that. So that's something that we've got to take into consideration. It took me a while to figure out what was going on there, so I had to do a bit of reading up, and then I've sussed what that is. So that's that part. So let's have a look on the amp, and then we can see what's going on there. Looking at the components, and you see where they all run through into this long tail pair. After looking at that schematic, let's have a look on here now and see what that equates to, what we've actually read off that schematic. So this bit here, which I thought first off, and we just zoom in a bit on that there, this bit, which you can see looks like it's been botched at some time, but that actually is right, because that is the anode of the EF86, and that's going into the control grid of that ECC83 DC coupled long tail pair. So notice that's straight through DC, so that is actually correct. So we don't quite know what's gone off there. Looks like a resistor's been changed there, but we'll change both of those. Oh, that one is for the screen, that 470k, and I think that's 100k, but I don't think it says that on the schematic. But anyway, we'll change those. there's the 1 meg. Oops, sorry, you can't see that. Let me just move the camera so you can see it. There. Ooh, there we go. Let's actually bring that down a bit and hone in a bit more. That's the 1 meg resistor there that's part of that balances. I think that balances out both sides of the phase splitter so that you get equal gain out of each. So that's how that's working. This then here is running down to this master volume, which you can see there. And if I just turn that way, we might get a bit more light in there. And we have, look, the lowly master volume that's all on its Todd. That's running there. And this wire here that you can see there is going to these 470k resistors, and they then feed, there's a pair there and another pair, oh there they are riding under those wires, another pair there, and those are and you can see that if we look at this one, for example, that's this tube. Remember that the inputs going into pin 6, these are like back to front. They're not actually, normally people go through pin 1 through the tone stack out to pin 6. These are back to front for some reason. So we're coming out to pin 1 and then to those 470k's there, sorry, from that plate there, 470k through that capacitor and into that 470, and those are bound on there in that in all that twisted wire there, and that one then cut there, and that also then feeds onto, where are we, there, we can see just at the bottom, so you can see that wire there. So they're all being fed through together, so it should be quite easy to remove the channels that we want to remove out of this. So remember, I've decided to keep 2. So these wires here, which you can see in this bunch, and what we're gonna try and do is hone in at, we can see, I'll get the camera down there, that's it, and that way a bit, like so. So you can see I've took one of these capacitors out. So each one of these sections in these capacitors is smoothing one of these preamp sections. If we look at this wire, this is missing because I took this one out to get a value. So we've got pink and white, and if we follow pink and white up this loom, that goes to this plate resistor here, and you can see that goes on to this tube. And if we then look at the purple and white there, that goes up, that goes to there, look, and that's to another plate resistor, and that's for that tube there, and so on. And each one of these powers the blue and white, that powers the phase inverter, phase splitter, and you can see that that's powering those 250 ohm resistors, and those resistors those capacitors underneath, they'll be the coupling caps to the EL34s, I would imagine. And then we've got, if we look up here, we've got grey and white, that's powering the EF86. So we can do away with one of these capacitors, because remember, we only need, so we need one for the phase splitter, one for the EF86, and one for each of our channels. So, which you can't see up there, but yeah, so one for the phase splitter, one for the EF86. So if we look at that, one for the phase splitter, one for the EF86, and the 2 channels that we need there, and then we just don't need that one. So need to probably blank that off with something, really. I don't like holes in the chassis, especially there. So the looking down at the, just get those in the corner there, hang on a minute, let's get that down, and this, there we go. So now we're looking at those on there. We're looking at these main electrolytics there. So I've bought 200 plus 100 capacitors to go in there, so instead of having 4 we'll just have 2 like those in series, just the same. So, and I'm going to put those 2 there because those holes, if I do have to leave them, then they're a long way from getting your finger through to touch that. Where if I use those and leave those again right over the exposed wires, we don't want that. So that's basically what's happening in that section. And then from the main thing first is to replace these, get this running, remove the 2 channels we want, make sure it's still running, and then we can start and mod the 2 channels we want and start replacing some components that we need to replace. And just as a quick look, what do we need to replace? We need to replace these. Really want replacing. They do test alright, but they're old and they look shabby. And these Hunts capacitors, you can bet they're leaky and they'll want replacing. These probably want replacing. These capacitors tend to hold up pretty well, so we're going to leave those in if we can. If none of those are leaky, we're going to check them. The plate resistors, some of these will go anyway because they're a pair for each channel, but we're going to replace the 2 channels we're having. We're going to drop those down to 100k, get rid of the rest. The bias capacitors needs to be changed. We've got a bias trim pot coming to go in the bias, so that'll be changed. Screen resistors need added on there. This mess needs sorting out. It's a mess. That needs sorting out. The power feed needs bringing off there, bringing around the back. That's another thing we're going to do. And the switch is going to go on the back as well, I've decided. We're going to make this amp safe. So that's just an update to where we are with things. So the capacitors are on order, we're just waiting for those now, and they're coming from a place in Scotland called Modulus, who I've bought stuff off for quite a while now. I'll put a link in the description and you can visit their website, and it's very reasonably priced stuff on there, and I found it to be a very good service. He's got a good selection of capacitors. He's got a good selection of transformers, turret boards, most things you want for, chassis. There's cabinets on there, there's all sorts. So go to that website, Modulus. I'll put the link in the description. That's where I get all my parts from, and the prices are really good, and even cheaper than eBay. So I don't know how he does it, to be honest. Right, so that's where we are with that. We'll move on. So just addressing this, sorting out this danger mouse in here. So just get that round to the light. This is getting a bit shadowed. There we go. So we are looking at disposing of this main switch and moving these fuses onto the back, which is what we're going to do. So I've snipped off the wires. Sorry about that crap camera work there. So I snipped off the wires, which are there now. Incidentally, on the HT, it's the negative that's going through the fuse, the ground, and look what they've done there. They actually soldered on the ground from the mains onto the back of the fuse instead of doing it onto the chassis. So we shall address that as well and get a proper star ground in there. So removing all that, where are we there? Yeah, that switch is going to be replaced with a new one, and these 2 fuse holders are being removed. I'm having 2 on the back. The pilot light's being removed, and that's going to be 6, which is down in the bottom there. You just see him hiding away there, that yellow one there. So that's going to be removed as well, and we're going to have a 6.3 pilot light in it. So I've soldered that wire on, that electrical tape's been removed, and I've soldered that wire on there, you can see, and it's that was the wire that was going to the HT fuse there. So that's all now repaired nicely. So these wires are all bunched together here, sorry, these are all bunched together and tie wrapped onto that bus wire. So we've removed that because we don't want them tie wrapped to the bus wire. So these are the AC in for the transformer. These are the heater supplies, which need winding up a bit tight, and these are also tagged into it, which are DC, so they also don't want to be in that bunch of wires, because we don't want DC and AC wires bunched together for obvious reasons. I think that's the case actually. No, that one, right, that one's the AC that's feeding the bias there and then going on to the diode, but that one is DC. That one's coming from there, look, from the capacitor there, as you can see me wobbling that, and that's going on to the screens. So that one needs taking out of that bunch of wires. We don't want that one in there. So right, we're going to get these switches drilled out now. So here's what I've made for the diodes to get rid of the breeze floaters. Took one of these tag boards, cut it to size, and put 4 diodes, 2 in series. Just so these diodes are 3 watts and 1000 volts, so that's not going to be an issue at all. So that's overkill, but there we go. Now where do we mount it? Well, this is another problem. Where do we mount it? Obviously it's going to be lifted off the chassis, so I'm just placing it. Can't mount it there because we've got that grill going on, and even if I could get between those grills technically with screws, you can't line any of that up. So the only place that I can get this is in the corner. We would ideally have loved it to be there, but the other thing is, if I move it in, the transformer's overlapping the chassis, so we're going to be drilling through the transformer. So I ain't and even if it was possible, I ain't playing that game, because it may just be enough, and I'm not that accurate with a drill. My metalwork is crap. So I think that's the place to mount that, up in that corner there, and then wire to it. Seems the most logical, being as it's this is for and against. So if I put it that way round, I've got to wire from that way round. I've got to wire from the transformer up to the diodes, but then the DC, I ain't got well, I ain't got nowhere near as far to wire it up because the caps are here. So swings and roundabouts, I'm closer to the AC, further away from the DC, so they look a bit odd stuck up in that corner, I must admit, but there really is nowhere else for those to go. And now it's tea break, and Pink is telling us that it's treat breaks for her, so off we jolly well go for the kettle and the treats cupboard, aren't we, Pink? Yes, come on then, let's go. Right, I had a bit of a rethink on this, and had a bit of I need to get this right. So I abandoned the in the corner idea and kind of killed 2 birds with 1 stew. I got to cover those 2 holes up. Remember, these 2 caps we have in here are hundreds, so we only need 2. So those holes needed covering anyway, and I got some nice strips of aluminium there, and they fitted a treat. So I've managed to mount that right more or less where those caps were going to be. So let's just hone in. So we've got a bolt in that corner there, and I've got a bolt here which is offset because I had to drill that underneath to make sure I didn't fall into any of the holes and things, and I've actually had to go between the holes. So a couple of M5 bolts in him, he's solid. So the board that we've done the capacitors on, the diodes on, you can have a look at that now. You can see what I've done there. So bolted through the chassis now, through the aluminium with it obviously, and I've put a bolt through, put lock nuts on the bottom of those, and then I've put another 3 nuts to make a standoff on each, and then a lock nut on top on there, and that is solid. You can't barely move it at all. And also just for added insulation, I've put some plastic at the back of there, which were just a convenience really, because it's one of the dividers out one of my parts drawers, and it almost fitted in there perfect. So I just filed about 3 or 4 minutes filing the bottom off, and it's gone in, and I've glued it, and that's just made it extra safe. Probably didn't need that, but it is. I kind of think that's probably closer to the chassis than it should be, so that's insulated it now, and that's pretty thick insulation. So I suppose the only worry with that is if, and chances, I've seen amps though, I have seen amps with bent chassis, if somebody belts it there and bends the chassis in and it's touching. I have seen amps that have, that have had that sort of damage. They've either been dropped or whatever, so there's a bit of protection there. So that's all tidy, solid. We've made a good job of getting rid of those holes, so that's tidied that up. I have removed on this end, channel 4 was protruding up through there because I'd got that strip of aluminium and it just wouldn't quite fit without removing that channel, so I just removed the wires and stuff, and that's gone under there. Absolutely brilliant. So that really now is, you can see that is solid. So I feel much better about that now, and we can get rid of the old breeze floaters. Well, I've got the floating diodes off, and they took a bit of getting off, so they probably wouldn't have fell off anyway, but nonetheless the live feed on the other end was still floating in the breeze. Oops, sorry, going too close. So these are the type of like the hook spade terminals. I don't know if you can see that. You can get around on that side to see. And what I've done is I've got all the old solder off it, and then I've filed them up, cleaned them up, so ready to put the new wires on. Here's the wires that here's the wire that I've done. So twisted this, so we're going to use this, and this is the AC feed to the diodes. So we've got the diodes wired in. Right, we've removed all those caps, those rather minging caps. I'm going to start fitting the new ones, but this chassis got, I don't know whether it's had a bit of an explosion at some time. We've got quite a bit of carbon on here, so cha-ching, I'm going to get all that off before we fit them. There we go, that looks a lot better. Cleaned all that off. We don't want carbon all around the caps. It don't look good, and it just ain't good. So that's all cleaned up. Right, we'll start fitting the new ones now. Job will be a squirrel. Well, I've got them in, but after a brief assessment, I think I've scored on the plankometer again. So first of all, I forgot to put the ground on there, so I've got to take that nut off again. But also, suddenly realised I've got very little support on this ground bus here. So I think I need to move this capacitor over there, and then put some bus wire to the ground on that one, which will then support that. So yes, I think that's 85 on the plankometer for that one. There we go, that's better. So I've got that over there now. So when I've got some quite thick ground bus wire, so I'm going to pop that over there just to support that, and that should be a winner. I might even turn it around so it's more flush with it, because it's actually not. It did look like that when I was got it on its side, but yeah, so I'll just loosen the cap off, turn it around, and do that. It's no big deal. Right, so we've moved on a bit, quite a bit actually, and we've had quite a few problems to overcome. You can see a board or two has appeared. So I think we'd more or less got as far as fitting this boarding for the diodes. We've got those in, but when I started to unravel the mess that we'd got there, plus I had a good scan of the schematic, buried under all of that was about 3 or 4 220k resistors. They were feed resistors for these channels that we've got over here, for the channels. Now this is the power supply, and is laid out a bit different on this amplifier than certainly than any other I've seen, where you've got like a downstream going on, you know, from node 1, node 2, node 3. This is laid out differently. It's more like a branch. So what we've got is we've got the power coming into the caps there from the rectifier, and we've got the choke fitted on there. We've got a 10k resistor there coming off that cap, and then from that 10k resistor feeds down here feeds the phase inverter, phase splitter, feeds that, and then it also feeds these 3 220k resistors here, which I've got as metal oxides. The others were carbons, 2 watts. Now the problem, actually they're 3 watts I think, I'm not sure now, I can't remember. The problem with that was all these resistors are just like tacked on here, there, and you're a right mess. So I thought, well, I can't have that. So what I've done is I've made this board, used the old nylon legs again, and fitted the resistors onto there so it was nice and tidy. Then we could feed off those resistors onto this board, which is a much better way of doing it. So they were just, and you know, and the thing is, there were even more resistors before because, well, there'd be an extra 2 because of the channels. One of those dropper resistors is feeding the EF86. The other 2 droppers are feeding each of those channels that I've got, but obviously I had 2 more channels. So if you can sort of visualize, you know, where you're going to fit all those resistors, tacking them all on and that. So I put that in, so much better layout. Now the ground bus is another thing. So I've put a star ground in down here. You can see if I just hone in there, you can see there's so I've got a star ground in now, proper star ground, and I worked it out. Everything was grounded off this point here. Even the ground on the power switch was connected to the end of the HT fuse, and that was obviously the HT fuse on the front was, because we'd actually established that wasn't so dangerous because it was the center tap of the AC. So they'd grounded the mains, the power cable to the AC center tap ground. Well, that was also grounded onto there as well, onto that. You can see it there. No, that's just fastened on there. It's just a bit of a, so we can't have that. So of course, as soon as I put the star ground on, then I'm going to have a ground loop. So I've cut away, there's where the ground bus started, so I've cut away all the ground loop there up to the preamp valves here, and just the phase inverter and the preamp valves. And what I've done is now I've created another ground over here, so and they all go to there. Now ideally I would have liked to have had the phase inverter grounded separate from the preamp tubes, but unfortunately with the rest of this ground bus and the way all this is wired around here, I've got some grounds coming from this phase inverter tube onto this ground bus. So I thought, well, if I ground the capacitor for this elsewhere than the ground bus, then I'm probably going to end up creating another ground loop. Grounding is a nightmare. So I thought I'll just keep that all together, and we'll see how we go. If it's humming when we power it up, then we're going to have to look again. But that's all a much better way. That was so poorly grounded there and dangerous. Had that bolt fell out of there, you know, it's only a little nut and bolt. Had that vibrated out of there, well, there'd have been no ground on the power cable either, although the amp probably wouldn't have worked anyway, but that's beside the point. So we've got this fancy, you can see there, cable tie thing in there, so that's nice and solid. Now the fuses and the switches I've obviously mounted on the back, and I'm just going to switch the amp round. So I'll switch the amp round now so you can see. So there's the switch that we've got there, and we've got some insulation on the they're the negatives, but the bottom ones are the positives, so we've got some insulation on there. And the HT fuse now, which I've obviously wired across the live feed and not the negative, because otherwise we've got, even when the fuse blows, we've got live voltage going all around, so we don't want that. So that's covered as well, and well covered, and the mains one's also insulated. Now why have I done that? Well, if it's the same old thing again, somebody's drawing this out of the case, they forget to switch they've still got it plugged in, they forget to switch it off, they put the fingers underneath to pull it out, and they get a nasty shock. So I just do stuff like that, make sure that's safe. Yeah, a bit extra work, some people won't bother, it's up to the individual. Me personally, I like to cover all bases, so I've done that. And you can see how I've done this, because obviously there's a lot of voltage on there, so they're imperative to get that one covered well. So what I've done is it's piece of heat shrink. I tie wrap them loose, start to then what I do is I get the heat gun on it, and then as it's shrinking I keep tightening the tie wraps, and they end up bulletproof. Can't get out of there for a million years, so without cutting the ties. So that's pink rustling about that, show me something. So that's all safe and sorted there. So the front panel now, which is upside down at the minute, so obviously, so we're left with the controls on the front. I'm just going to try and get back out a bit so you can see a good part of it. So you can see across there, I've removed that's where all the fuses and all that dangerous wiring was. That's gone. I've removed channel 4 and I've removed channel 1. That just leaves us with 2 and 3 and the master volume in the centre there. So that's all taken out, and of course we've got the pilot lights to put in, and I did say pilot lights because I've decided to have 2, one in the bottom, one in the top. Why would I do that? Well, I'm a bit of a poser I think on that, but also it gets rid of 2 of the holes. I'm end up putting grommets in holes and things, so it'll look cool with 2 pilot lights. We'll put a grommet in that hole, I've already put one in there, and we've got to grommet up all the other holes. So all looking pretty spectacular. So I've spun it back around again. Now then, because of this branching off set out they've got here, because of that, I think I've answered the question on why I've got extremely large resistors on the plates on this phase splitter, on the phase inverter. So normally there'd be a couple of dropping resistors downstream by the time you got to that, but obviously that's being fed straight off via that 10k resistor. That's being fed almost straight off the main well, node 2, node 1, node 2. It's all kind of one power supply. That these look about 5 watt to me. Obviously they're not wire wounds. We don't really want wire wounds as plate resistors. We can't really have metal oxide for plate resistors either, because they're not very, they're supposed to cause low level distortion, so we don't want those. So I'm going to have to try and find some 5 watt carbon films to replace those, I think, because I really want to replace those. The schematic shows them as 180k. They are 150k. So there is quite a few discrepancies in the schematics, and I actually found another Selmer PA schematic where it doesn't have this EF86 set out. It has the ECC83. It's like a single triode pushing this into this phase inverter. So I'm going to get some. I'm going to look at getting those replaced. I've got a feeling they're a bit out of spec. I might be wrong. I'll test those and just see. So what have we got left to do? I've stripped out the components as well as those channels on here. on this board, stripped out the components, and I've also cleaned this board. I've sucked out all the solder out of the eyelets and cleaned this board, and I've done that in 2 places, and I want to make sure this board's clean. We don't want no conductive board problems or anything like that. It's actually quite a good thick board. But now I want to take this board out and look underneath, and the reason for that is so I found, you can see these here, I've had to rejoin the choke wires because one of them was badly burnt and the other didn't look much better. So what I've done is I've double heat shrink them and then slid those on the top. So so that's because of that, and they were kind of pushed under that board partially, and they're certainly coming from under there. And also this, look at this wire, although most of these are, it's very black under there. Oh sorry, I keep doing that. It's pulled this out, it's very black under there. So, and if you look there, if we just hone in there, you can just see some carbon there, and you can see, if I put that on my finger, you can see that it's a trace of carbon. So has something blown and gone that way, or has there something under that board that is a nasty surprise? So I need to take that board out and I need to check. I can't see the point in doing all this work, doing all the safety stuff, and then not having a peek under there. So we're going to take this board out. I mean, there's all these, I can take all these wires off, and there's down here, and there's a few on the front, but I know where all the wires are going now in my head. I've traced it all out, so I've got all that going in my head, so I know where they're going. That's no problem, so I can take that out easily. Hence why I've done this. I know where all these wires are going, because I've sat and studied the schematic and traced it all out in my head. So that's one job I want to do, is take that board out and investigate what's going on under there, make sure there's no drips of solder off these eyelets that are touching the board or close to touching it. We've got no shorts before we switch it on. And also the other thing we're going to do, and look down there, is these tubes. So I'm just going to switch it round again. So I swung it round again. It's a bit of a beast. It's not one of the things I can swing around while I've got the camera in my hand. So we've got obviously 4L34s. These are the screen resistors. Didn't like that set out, and I'm not having it, so they're coming out, and they don't make a blind bit of sense to what's on the schematic. These are on the plates, and there's some, I don't know what they are, whether they're some kind of inrush resistor or what they are, but they're coming out. There's these burnt, well, that one looks a bit burnt, don't it? These are grid stoppers, and these burnt offerings here again are more of those resistors from the plate where they've just put 2 in, and they haven't fared very well. So I'm just going to remove that and wire it like a Marshall. Left a bit of solder in. Oh, it's just earth tagging. I wonder where that had gone. So we're going to strip all that out, and we're going to wire these sockets properly, like they are on a Fender or a Marshall. We're going to wire them up properly and get rid of all this crap in here. These cables here we're going to replace, because they all look, if they're not burnt, they don't look very great, do they? So, and we've got some 5-watt 1K screen resistors, which we're going to put on instead of these 2 screen resistors, which seem to be supplementing all 4 valves. And we're going to clean and tidy that up. There's that to do. Then there's the bias, which we just need to sort out. And the thing is, I bought a proper Fender trim pot for the bias. The only trouble is where I'm going to mount it. There's not really much room left, and that's been the problem with this all along. Is, you know, and I think this is why, you know, they tacked those diodes onto the back of the transformer and left those floating, and all these resistors here that were just all in a mishmash mess. You know, there just wasn't much room. I've created some room by putting 2 caps in. These are dual capacitors in here, and I've wired those up so they work as for because they're 500 volts each, they're wired in series, there's like 1000 volts working there. So which brings me to another thing which we're going to look at later. So I'm just going to swing this board round again. So the three electrolytics we had, which were dual caps, we had here. They're obviously for the preamp sections and the phase splitter, whatever. We've only got two now because we've done away with two channels. The hole for the other one is under that board. Those capacitors that came out of there were 350 volts working. Now, and I can never understand why amps are made this way. This amp has no standby on it, and I don't do standby switches as a rule. The only use I ever see for a standby switch is to prevent massive inrush of current, because obviously the valves warm up, and as soon as you switch on the HT, there's a current draw, which then draws down the HT voltage. And I'm going to put the meter on this and just test this theory. But when you switch this amplifier on, there's going to be nearly 500 volts going straight through the power supply, right really, up to these capacitors. Now there's going to be no current on that, but they're going to be above their working volts. Not for very long, mind you, because as the amp begins to warm up, that voltage will then drop. But 350 volts, this amp, when it's up and running, is drawing 446 volts on the HT. That's got to be close to 500 volts when there's no current draw. And what happens is if this amp's got no tubes in now, assume it are all wired up. If I switch it on, I'll get a set voltage on node 1, on node 2, and on node 3, and on whatever. All these nodes will have the same voltage on. The reason is there'll be no current draw on them. The resistors don't start to take effect until we get current. So 350 volts in there. Every time this amp was switched on, it has no standby switch. Every time this amp was switched on, those valves, those capacitors there, the 350 volt working, maybe only for, I don't know, 15 seconds or so, we're getting absolutely hammered. There'd be 150 volts more in those caps getting on than they can handle. And if we looked at the state of this amplifier when I actually opened it, the big 4 capacitors were fine. Those 3 caps were shot to ribbons. So, you know, this thing, oh well, I've got a standby switch on my amp, so it'll be fine. We'll just put. You don't need a standby switch. You need to make sure those caps can stand the inrush of, you know, the working volts of the capacitor can stand that inrush. That's my logical way of looking at it. I might be wrong. If I am, I'm not a tech. Remember this, as I do this as a hobby, and well, it's just what I do, as long with the guitar and everything else. It's all part of what I do. If I'm wrong on that, then somebody leave that in the comments, tell me why, and I'll take that on board, and that'll solve that problem for me. But I have put 500 volt working capacitors in there, and I'm hoping that when I switch it on, they're going to be more than 500 volts. You know, it doesn't matter on the first power nodes because they're wired in series. There's 1000 volts there. They're 500 volts working in wired in series, so we've got 1000 volts. But these they're not wired in series, so with 500 volts working. So that was just a point I wanted to cover. That, you know, and it does seem strange that those capacitors were the ones that were absolutely wrecked, and the other ones which were 450 volts working, which you'd have 900 volts there, they're absolutely fine. I bet those capacitors weren't even leaking, and I mean, I've taken them out because they're old. Can't leave old capacitors like that in an amp. So that's the state of play there we've got. So the power supply basically now is wired up, and we're onto this board. We've got the 4 output valves to service the you know, all the resistors and things to service those, and then we've got to rebuild this bias, new diode and things. So kind of now we're into service, what a tech would probably call service territory rather than rebuilding territory. That's all rebuilt. This amp now, is a lot of it's over spec, and that's me all over really. These same with these diodes that we've got there, you know, the 3 amp 1000 volts working, and obviously I've got them in series as well there, so that's how I like to do things. This thing will last years once it's done right. New capacitors, increase the working volts upon those as well. Metal oxide resistors, usual thing most techs do. Not that I'm a tech, but still. So that's the next job, is to rebuild this bias, do these valve sockets, and I think I'm going to do those first. And then there's, so some of these 220k plate resistors, and this is another reason, these are 2 watts, aren't they? And that's another reason, again, as you're coming downstream just from here, you know, it's like there's no, although having said that, that one's 1 watt, but it looks like it's been changed. So I've got 2 plate resistors there, one for each, one of those for each triode on that ECCH3 12X7 there. And these are the coupling capacitors, which are 15 nanofarad. So I'm changing these plate resistors, they're miles out of spec anyway, so they're being changed. And then once I've got all those changed and all those components, and I've wired it up and it's running, then what we're going to do is look at modding it. Just not massively modding it. Someone left a comment on the part 1 saying, you know, I ought to have a couple of channels on it, and I'd had a bit, I was already starting to have a bit of a rethink, and I thought, yeah, that's right, it's having at least have 2 channels on it, then we've got a bit of variation. So that's why I've left 2 as well. So I've stripped off all the wiring and everything. I'm just leaving the seats in. There's no reason to take them out, and then should it ever fall into other hands and somebody wants to do some more, they can do. So there's one there, and then the other one's here. So all the cables are stripped off, including the heater wires. On this one, the heaters are wired in parallel, so I've just left them connected on the socket. I don't see any reason why I've got to cut that chain over there. We're not in series with those, so I've just left those like that. In fact, that being at the front, I might even connect the pilot lights. No, probably not, probably too far away. So, which is another thing we've got to do, the pilot lights. So that's so removing those 2 tubes from the heater supply has saved 600 milliamps. So because I have got that's another bit of a bee I get in my bonnet about, you know, people are saying, oh, you know, add another tube to that. You see this on amps regular, we'll just add another tube to it, but you ain't got the specs of the power supply, you don't know. You start adding things to the power supply, before you know where you are, you've drawing too much current from it, from where it can draw. I would imagine most transformers are, you know, from this era, you know, are well spec'd. But I've removed the 600 milliamps, so I've now got something for me. You know, I've got extra milliamps for me pilot lights, and there's no risk of me drawing more than the heater supply will handle. So that's something that to bear in mind whenever you're adding things to amplifiers. Will the power supply take it, you know? But again, that's just me covering all bases. So that's where we are with this now. That's where we've got to it, and I think I'm going to conclude this as part 2. So in part 3 we're going to do these tubes, these output tubes, and the bias, and the rest of these resistors. In part 3, get all these and get it so, and then just get it so it's running, and then see how we are there. And then if we've overrun a bit with that, then we'll do a part 4, and we'll have part 4 that'll be on modding it and then demoing it. Demoing this amp should be fun in the house, not it for 100 watts. So we need to get a bit more gain out of these channels, I'm guessing, because and I can tell by, if I look on the schematic, you know, for instance, the grid leak resistors are only 220k. We know we can get more out of those with 1 meg. Most guitar amps have got 1 meg resist. Not all guitar amps, but most guitar amps have got 1 meg grid leaks, like your Marshalls and things. So we'll be going down that road but we'll do a couple of different channels, one probably more Fenderish, one towards a Marshall maybe, or even something different. I don't know, we can worry about that later. So thanks for watching and listen to me drabble on again. I hope you found this I hope you found this amplifier project interesting. And as I say, the guy that left a comment on there, he's actually got one of these himself. So I think he's quite enjoyed, you know, and watching it coming to life again. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you wish to, and I'll see you in part 3. You take care. Bye bye.